I'm continuing to read from my book, The Super Couple, A Formula for Extreme Happiness in Marriage, in which I interviewed extremely happily married couples to find out if extreme happiness was accidental or if there was a formula. If you've been watching these videos by now, you know that there is, in fact, a formula, and it's SACRED. You can get that formula by reading the book or listening to these videos in hopes that this too will make your marriage extremely happy. And don't think you can't, because my own marriage went from extremely unhappy and wanting divorce to happy, very happy, and not yet extremely happy, but I think we're on our way. If you like what you're watching, please feel like contributing. Click in the link below, buymeacoffee.com, or if you can, say prayers for me, my ministry, my marriage, and my family, or even have a mass said for me. I'm not afraid to ask. I covet your prayers. But until then, we're moving into the next chapter, which is called The Gendered Brain. A large amount of information is already commonly known regarding the differences in the male and the female brains. Society and science have long since gotten beyond the previously articulated and erroneous notions of earlier generations that men and women and their brains are pretty much the same, and that it is the socialization process alone that forces boys and men to act one way and girls and women to act another. Socialization is definitely a huge contributor to why we act, feel, and think in the ways that we do. We are greatly influenced by socialization and cannot ignore its influences. However, if I treated my daughter and son in the exact same ways, said the same words, dressed them the same ways, forced them to play with the same toys and differed in no way at all in our ways of interacting, the ways that most boys would respond would be vastly different from the ways most girls would respond to the very same situations. It's fact. We're different. So when I meet with clients for relationship coaching, I spend a large amount of time dealing with gender differences that frequently arise in relationships. And these differences are generally recognized through conflict. When in agreement, there is naturally no need to focus on our ways of interacting. We enjoy the peace with little or no attention paid to our similarities. We just know we're happy. When we disagree, however, our differences become evident through the friction they cause. Then we notice it. When in our sessions, I begin to explain how typical men's brains are wired and how typical women's brains are wired, women respond in certain situations because of structural and hormonal differences in her brain from a man's brain. There seems to be a breathed and mutual sigh of relief from the couple who are instantly educated and validated in their own ways of behaving, and to a point of, so that's why he or she does such and such every time blank occurs. I've made it very clear in this book that I'm talking about the majority of men and the majority of women when it comes to most situations and most brains. And yes, there are anomalies, but those who are just not the same as most others in their category. But I will say it one more time, these brain differences are recognizable between most men and most women. Don't worry if you're not of the norm. I'm sure you will still recognize yourself in many of the discussions and differences we talk about. The goal is to read this and be better able to not only recognize the differences in your ways of responding from those of your mates, but also to be better able to articulate them to your mate in order to work through areas of conflict. So now let's talk about some of the very basic brain differences. Of course, new research is coming out daily that can further explain these principles, and some are more academic sounding than others. My purpose here is not to explain neural functioning in rich detail because I'm not a neuroscientist, but rather a social scientist. Further, you likely could not care less about having too many of the finely detailed differences spelled out. However, it is essential to understand some of these basic physiological differences as they apply to husbands and wives and their differing responses to the same stimuli. So I'll do my best to give you the information that you need most. I have decided it best to quote an expert in the field of neuroscience. Her name is Luann Brizendine. She's a neuropsychiatrist and author of the books The Female Brain and The Male Brain, in order to do so. Afterwards, I will overlay the information garnered from my social science and relationship research to offer the most complete picture of how men and women function within and outside of supermarriages. In her introduction to the book called The Male Brain, Brizendine writes this. And it's a very long quote, so I'll tell you when the quote's done. Male and female brains are different from the moment of conception. It seems obvious to say that all the cells in a man's brain and body are male. Yet this means that there are deep differences at every level of every cell between the male and the female brain. The male cell has a Y chromosome and the female does not. That small but significant difference begins to play out early in the brain as genes set the stage for later amplification by hormones. By 8 weeks after conception, the tiny male testicles begin to produce enough testosterone to marinate the brain and fundamentally alter its structure. Over the course of a man's life, the brain will be formed and reformed according to a blueprint drafted by both genes and the male sex hormones. And this male brain biology produces his distinctly male behaviors. In the female brains, the hormones estrogen, progesterone, and oxytocin predispose brain circuits toward female typical behaviors. In the male brain, it's testosterone, vasopressin, and a hormone called MIS, Müllerian inhibiting substance, in case you wanted to know, that have the earliest and most enduring effects. The behavioral influences of male and female hormones on the brain are major. We have learned that men use different brain circuits to process special information and solve emotional problems. Their brain circuits and nervous system are wired to their muscles differently, especially in the face. The female and male brains hear, see, intuit, and gauge what others are feeling in their own special ways. Overall, the brain circuits in male and female brains are very similar, but men and women can arrive at and accomplish the same goals and tasks using different circuits. We also know that men have 2.5 times the brain space devoted to sex drive in their hypothalamus, as do women. Sexual thoughts flicker in the background of a male's visual cortex all day and night, making him always at the ready for seizing sexual opportunity. Women don't always realize that the penis has a mind of its own for neurological reasons, and mating is as important to men as it is to women. Once a man's love and lust circuits are in sync, he falls just as head over heels in love as a woman, perhaps even more so. When a baby is on the way, the male brain changes in specific and dramatic ways to form the daddy brain. Men also have larger brain centers for muscular action and aggression. His brain circuits for mate protection and territorial defense are hormonally primed for action starting at puberty. Pecking order and hierarchy matter more deeply to men than most women realize. Men also have larger processors in the core of the most primitive area of the brain, which registers fear and triggers protective aggression, the amygdala. This is why some men will fight to the death defending their loved ones. What's more, when faced with a loved one's emotional distress, his brain area for problem solving and fixing the situation will immediately spark. And that's the end of her very long quote. So I write, okay, aren't you glad that lesson is over? Well, now it's time to make sense of it all. First of all, isn't it amazing to see all of the different things going on in men's and women's brains? That alone should illuminate the fact that since our brains and hormonal production are different from one another, then of course how we interact in the world and in our marriages on a daily basis is also going to be greatly affected by these differences. Again, if you want an extremely well-articulated, more neurologically detailed explanation of the differences between the male and the female brains, I would suggest you read Brizendine's book in her entirety. Books, actually. I found these 2 books extremely intriguing and well written. They gave me an enormously clear understanding of why we do what we do. from a physiological standpoint. There are others, of course, but these are two of my favorites. While each of the different brain sections and hormonal influences affect our behaviors in different ways, for the sake of explaining how super husbands and super wives interact, I, Christine Bacon, am going to focus primarily on two areas: the two hemispheres, which is the gray matter right here, and the corpus callosum, that's this white matter that goes right down the center of the brain. I am also going to focus on two hormones, testosterone and oxytocin. I will be explaining them in as minimal detail as necessary to make clear the factors that lead to superness. So let's start with the hemispheres, the gray matter here, where the brain gets its functioning power. We all have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and each of which houses an amygdala, the emotion center, and is responsible for processing most of the emotional function. Between the two hemispheres is the corpus callosum, which I lovingly refer to as the freeway system that sends messages from the right hemisphere to the left hemisphere and vice versa. For the most part, the hemispheres speak to each other. The left hemisphere's brain messages toggle back and forth between both sides of the brain, as well as do those messages originated in the right hemisphere. Pieces of information on one side connect to other pertinent messages and memories on the other. Logic and emotions interact. Connections and relationships are made between one situation, thought, or emotion to what might otherwise seem a wholly unrelated thought, situation, or emotion. However, at about 8 weeks gestation, the male baby's brain is inundated with testosterone, and that testosterone singes the pathways in this corpus callosum, thereby prohibiting to greater or lesser degree the left brain and the right brain from speaking to each other. As such, we can envision the male brain as having compartments, each one separate from the other, where the different compartments do not touch or interfere with one another. Therefore, if the male is dealing with a particular topic, he goes to that particular compartment in the particular hemisphere of his brain that deals with that topic and generally stays there until that conversation or situation comes to some sort of resolution before he moves on comfortably to another situation and another part of his brain, which takes about 20 minutes. A fairly common way of saying this is that the typical male brain is much more compartmentalized than is the female brain. As such, when he's dealing with the kids, he goes to the kids compartment. When dealing with the job, he goes to the job compartment. When dealing with the finances, he goes to the finance box. When dealing with the in-laws, he goes to the in-law box, sports box. He goes to every different box, so on and so forth. Of course, whenever I'm teaching one of my seminars, the question that inevitably comes up, albeit tongue-in-cheek much of the time, is, does a male then not use his whole brain? Yeah, haha, ladies, of course he does. But unlike the typical woman, the typical man uses only one part of his brain at a time. Some of these boxes or compartments to which he must go at any given time are in the right hemisphere, and some are in the left. He goes to whichever part is needed for a given situation. It's much more of a linear way of processing information or situations. This explains why most men can be so single-minded. And thank God that they can be, because women, for the most part, are all over the place. Women's brains are not so linear and sequential in their processing of information as are male brains. Because a female has no such singeing of the neural pathways in her corpus callosum at birth, in the womb, as did men, her left and right hemispheres continue to constantly speak to each other. Connections exist from any one subject to a myriad of other subjects. It's not very linear or sequential at all. Women will often start out discussing family and then progress through their favorite sitcom, shoe shopping, and world peace, all within the same conversation without ever having to have had solved anything. Each topic can easily connect to the other, and even if the topics might seem unrelated to men, the female brain will have little difficulty making connections between them. To men who might be observing a female conversation, it might seem as if they begin by opening the top drawer of the dresser, then quickly go to the middle drawer, then run across the room all the way to the armoire, and then open the bottom middle drawer before quickly being forced to race back to the dresser to reopen the initial drawer that began the conversation. It happens so fast that the man runs frantically around the room, opening drawers and attempting to shut each before another is opened, only to eventually give up at the impossible challenge, leaving the room in chaos with half-open drawers strewn with unfolded clothing, and thus he throws himself face up on the bed with a television remote in his hands to speed him to his nothing box to rest from the overexertion. It's exhausting. The male brain seeks desperately to finish or close one compartment before moving into the next one, while women do this effortlessly. This is the reason most women are typically better at multitasking than are most men. Keeping this vision in your head, it is for this reason that females, usually unknowingly, often overwhelm the males in their lives when having a normal conversation with them. He's trying to decide into which compartment he needs to enter in order to engage this conversation with you and, of course, fix whatever it is that you are talking about. And yet, he's often left woefully lost and frustrated when no single compartment is determined or sufficient for the conversation. When this happens, the male brain is flooded by a rush of chemicals that attempt to shut down this overstimulation, which is considered excessive emotional arousal, as a matter of protection for him. Women experience no such flooding until a significantly higher state of emotional arousal has been reached. John Gottman, the grandfather of all marriage research, has produced myriad studies regarding this flooding and its effects on the male brain. If you're interested in a more scholarly explanation of what I'm about to discuss, you should attempt to read as much of it as possible to help fill in some of your own gaps in understanding of male and female differences. I will, however, provide this example of the differences in male and female conversation in order to better exemplify this point. Ladies, pay special attention to the quick topic changes and to envision just how quickly we can overwhelm the single-focused male brain. Guys, pay attention how it happens. We're not trying to annoy you. So I just met a girlfriend at a local coffee shop. She had just passed her qualifying exams for her PhD, and we met to celebrate. The conversation started out like this. Tell me all about it. How was the defense? What did this professor say, and what did that professor do? As she started answering the questions, she mentioned that she had just gotten off the phone telling her mother all about the defense, and then the conversation changed directions to, well, where does your mother live? How many other kids does she have? Oh, really? She's that much older than you? Why did she have kids so late in life? The conversation trajectory then changed to a discussion of family and upbringing. Really? Your mother only has an 8th grade education? My mom only has a 10th grade education. Wow, we have so much in common. My mom grew up in Milwaukee, actually. So did I, and I'm going to do one of my super couples there this November. You're from Milwaukee? Yeah, my brother lives there right now. What a coincidence. And what part of Milwaukee does he live? Well, I'm doing my seminar at the Marcus Center downtown. Well, he lives right there in the Marquette area. That's right where I will be. You should tell him he needs to attend my seminar. Well, actually, I will. He's divorced and currently living with his girlfriend. I won't be able to convince him, but I will be able to convince her. She can get him to do anything. Why did he divorce? Was there someone else involved? You get the picture. While the conversation started out on one topic, her qualifying exams, it changed directions about 6 times, from our parents to our home cities, to our siblings, to relationships and seminars, and so on. As women, there was no difficulty in doing this whatsoever. We were on the same page and able to follow each other's train of thought as they progressed from topic to topic. We were making connections or relationships between topics. Every topic related in some way to the next topic, and then off we went down another trail. In between these conversational changes, we'd often circle back to one of the aforementioned topics and pick up where we left off. Some topics were finished, but most were not. This was a very circular conversation. Now, by a male or a linear perspective, few, if any, of the topics we discussed were completed or discussed from beginning to end, and we were fine with that. Finishing them was not necessarily our purpose in coming together. Connecting or relating with one another was more important. If there were any compartments in our brains, our conversations simply passed through them on their way to and through other compartments and topics, much like a train that passes through different cities on a route to numerous destinations. Through this example, I hope you're now clearer how women can absolutely drive men nuts when trying to share a conversation with them. While men might be absolutely desirous of following our thoughts in order to process what we are saying, because they love us or care about us and want to please us, they are trying to follow a linear sequence of thoughts. Women are anything but linear. When we connect one topic to another too quickly, we lose them, our men. Okay, babe, I'm here for you. I'm in the qualifying exam compartment for you, babe. I'm all yours. I'm in, fully focused. Let's talk. Hey, wait, what? I thought we were talking about qualifying exams. Are we finished with that now? I mean, okay, wait. Now we're talking about your parents? Let me go to the parents compartment. Okay, ready. Let's talk about our parents. Wait, whoa, now I thought you were talking about parents. Why on earth are you not talking about the bills or the kids? Do we finish our conversation? Do we finish any of these conversations? Where the heck are we going with this? Get to the point. Tell me the freaking point of this conversation so I can answer it, resolve it, and be done with it. Tuned out. You see, women aren't attempting to annoy the heck out of men when we converse. So that's what often happens, especially if we are unaware of these neural differences between the male and the female brains and our ways of processing information and communicating. And I haven't even begun to address the hormonal influences yet. I know I had no idea of these differences when I was young and a stupid newlywed, talking to my husband faster than a jackhammer on concrete. Well, it had to be his problem for not listening well enough or not caring enough to do so. That's sarcasm. Before I end this chapter, I'd like to add one more bit of information to complete this conversation or communication. It might seem that much of this section was devoted to telling women how we communicate in a manner that is unappealing to men and their ways of communicating, as if we are the problem and should curtail our style of communicating to better match the male style. That is not at all what I sought to do. As a scholar or speaker in the field of marriage communication, I'm completely cognizant of the fact that most of my readers are initially females. I say initially because it's generally the woman who's registered the couple for the seminar or picked up this book first. But soon she either hands it to her man to read or she reads it to him to help him better understand her and what she's been unsuccessfully trying to say herself. So I'm addressing much of this chapter to us women first, so that we can have our own personal aha moments and thus gain an awareness of our need to amend our communicative behaviors in order to be better heard and understood by members of the male species. But men are not exempt either. Part 4 of this book will extend this learning into actual and practical ways for men and women to communicate as super couples do. Each of us must adapt our ways to better meet the communicative needs of the other. For now, our greatest imperative has been to illuminate that communication is an extremely important contributor to the marital superness, and one that can only be overlooked with dire relational consequences. During my research, I heard super couples say the main ingredients in achieving and maintaining an extremely happy marriage are kindness, honor, esteem, respect, friendship, and communication. In part 3 of this book, we will address something that will likely astound the masses. That which was not considered a main ingredient in super couple marriages. I would give you a hint. Love. You'll have to come back tomorrow to hear that. None of them said that love was an ingredient. Super couple marriages. Cray, cray. All right. I look forward to hearing your comments. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. Thanks for watching this Bacon Bit. And as always, remember to live your life and your marriage sunny side up.